The word exploit and explore have two meanings that correlate in this video. One of them is positive. It means to discover, to venture. The other is negative. It means to abuse, to take advantage. This word in both meanings sums up well the way Europe used to become such a rich and powerful continent nowadays. After all, the pioneering spirit of the Europeans led them to surpass borders, allowing the advancement of science and the development of humanity. On the other hand, this happened amid the enslavement of human beings and the destruction of cultures in other parts of the earth. In other words, exploration in all possible meanings was responsible to shape this region and influencing the entire world over the past centuries. And this leads us to a question: what would Europe be without exploration? Welcome to another video. To begin answering that question, we need to go back in time. Let's go to a time when Europeans had not yet set sail in caravels to explore the world. With the invasions, the population migrated to the countryside and feudalism began to emerge, a political and economic structure in which knights offered military service to lords, landowners, and in return received property and the right to collect taxes in that territory. While this emerged in Europe, in Asia, the scenario was different. The great Romans still resisted. One of those regions in particular was the eastern branch of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, which occupied part of the Middle East and would survive about 1,000 years longer than the Western Roman Empire. In China, major dynasties like the Tang ruled the region, where important cities were beginning to emerge. Despite the differences, Europeans and Asians had common interests, such as the pursuit to boost their economies. Exchanges between the two regions, especially through the Silk Road, a series of routes used for transporting fabrics and spices like cloves, cinnamons, and nutmeg, sold at extremely high prices in Europe, were found abundantly in India. The profit margin for merchants reached an impressive 700%. But everything changed in the year 1453, when the Ottoman Empire took Constantinople, which was the capital of Byzantine Empire. The Middle Ages came to an end. Among other measures, the Ottomans blocked the old trade routes, prompting Europeans to seek another path to India. Therefore, in the second half of the 15th century, European kings began encouraging voyages by navigators to find this new route. And this marked the beginning of the era of the Age of Exploration. Portugal is considered the pioneer of this phase, and this is due to a series of reasons, such as the political and economic stability of the time, but mainly to the geography position of Portugal. Just look at the map to realize how privileged Portugal's location is when it comes to maritime exploration. The entire coastline is hugged by the Atlantic Ocean, and a series of maritime currents facilitate easy departure of vessels from this region. With all this context, the Portuguese made significant and quick advantages of the maritime exploration. In 1488, Bartolomeu Dias became the first European to navigate around the Cape of Good Hope, at the southern tip of the African continent. And a decade later, in 1498, Vasco da Gama finally fulfilled the dream of reaching India from the Atlantic Ocean. Between these two voyagers, another kingdom known for maritime explorations achieved a historic feat while also attempting to reach India. In 1492, on an expedition ordered by the Spanish crown, the Genoese navigator Cristobal Columbus led Europeans to the Americas for the first time. But actually, not many people know, but that was not the first time that a European set foot on the American continent. Around the year 1000, Viking explorers were far north where is known today as Canada. They even built small colonies that survived for a decade until they were destroyed by indigenous people. But back in the age of exploration, a few years after Columbus arrived in the Caribbean, a Portuguese expedition found a new land. It was the year 1500, and Pedro Álvares Cabral landed in what would later be called Porto Seguro in Brazil. In the following decades, the Portuguese and Spanish would explore America in every possible way. Indigenous people were killed, enslaved, raped, and forcefully converted to Christianity. trees were felled, minerals extracted, and every possible wealth would be stolen and taken to Europe. The division of the new land occurred even before the arrival of the Portuguese in Brazil. This happened with the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. The Portuguese and Spanish created an imaginary line, a meridian 370 leagues, about 1,800 kilometers west of Cape Verde. All lands west of this line belonged to Spain, while those to the east would be Portuguese territory. In other words, with just a paper and a pen, Portugal and Spain decided to just divide the world as if they have all this power. And it was not the only time that Europeans would be acting this way in the centuries that followed. This was made easier through the exploration of another continent at the same time, Africa. The maintenance of colonies only occurred due to the trafficking of enslaved people. Between the years 1500 and 1800, Brazil alone took shipments of about 4 million men, women, and children who were forcibly taken from their lands and brought to work on the other side of the Atlantic. This happened through Portuguese trading posts on the African coast. These were installations where the Portuguese met with representatives from African kingdoms to establish diplomatic and commercial relations. The traffickers managed to capture the future enslaved individuals through ambushing tribes and villages. Others were prisoners of war who were taken to ports where they would be sold to the Europeans. There they were exchanged for goods such as gunpowder, tobacco, and even rum. Branded with a hot iron to identify to whom they belonged, they were placed on slave ships, also known as tumbeiros, since about 25% of the abducted individuals died during the voyage. Each vessel transported about 500 enslaved individuals, and the journeys lasted about 1 to 2 months. The food quality was extremely poor, diseases spread easily, and enslaved individuals that were in bad conditions were simply thrown into the sea. The disposal of bodies was such a scale that there were alerts of increasing shark numbers along the route through the Atlantic Ocean. When the Africans finally arrived in Brazil, they had a life solely dedicated to working to support the Portuguese crown. In addition to the sugar mills, another even more arduous workplace emerged. The enslaved individuals had not only extracted gold but also worked on the construction of roads and bridges to transport the metal. Overall, it's estimated that in the 700s, during the so-called gold cycle, between 800 and 900,000 kilograms of gold were extracted from Brazil. The exact number is difficult to pinpoint due to a lot of smuggling. Miners and merchants conceal the actual amount extracted to pay fewer taxes, since 1/5 of everything exploited should go to the Portuguese crown. Still, in one way or another, about 4/5 of the Brazilian gold production ended up in Europe. This value was used, for example, in carrying out public works in Portugal. Some famous constructions were directly erected in the funds raised from the gold tax, such as imposing National Palace of Mafra. And it was not only in Portugal that the Brazilian gold ended up. One of the nations that took benefit of our gold was England. In 1703, Portugal and England signed the Methuen Treaty, known as Treaty of Panos e Vinhos. It established advantage in the sale of Portuguese wine to England and English fabrics to Portugal. The flow was uneven. England sold much more fabric, and with that, Portugal sent a lot of gold to the English. In 1738 alone, for example, 8,000 kilograms of gold were needed for the Portuguese to pay the difference between imports and exports with the English. So much wealth would allow England to become the center of the Industrial Revolution between the late 700s and the early 800s. And it was precisely the English who pressed for the end of slavery in Brazil. With the industrialization, England no longer depended on the slave trade. Factory owners believed that the end of slavery could create a new consumer market and lead to the growth of another economic sectors. English pressure combined with slave revolts in various parts of the American territory led to the end of slavery in several countries throughout the 19th century, and during the same period, colonized countries achieved their independence. However, the independence movements in America did not mean the end of European power. Even without the direct control of American countries, Europeans continued seeking to increase their influence worldwide. Therefore, between the 19th and 20th centuries, Europe focus shifted to another continent, Asia. Driven by the Industrial Revolution, England needed raw materials and sought a new consumer market. France, also industrializing, followed the same path. Thus, the two nations led the new imperialist race, with the Dutch and Germans joining the group. The English presence in India, for example, left a trail of destruction, causing famine and revolt. The invaders disregarded local traditions, imposed Christianity, mixed members of different castes in military equipment, and even used a beef fat, considered a sacred animal, to waterproof ammunition. In the late 1850s, all these circumstances led to the Indian Rebellion, considered one of the first movements of independence in India and Asian countries as a whole. This environment of European dispute and division in Asian territory was one of the factors that led to the escalating global tension that culminated in outbreak of World War II in 1914. In addition to the Asia and South American, another continent shared by the Europeans was Africa itself. Between 1884 and 1885, the Berlin Conference brought together the major European powers to divide African territory among themselves. Thinking only of their own interests, leaders of Portugal, Spain, Germany, Italy, France, England, Belgium, and the Netherlands claimed the right to divide a continent without considering the cultural, religious, and linguistic difference of each place. To this day, this division has drastic consequences for Africa and is at the root of a series of conflicts that persist on the continent. This Eurocentric view of the world, in which Europeans see themselves at the center of the earth, manifests in various ways in everyday life. The world map themselves, which had so many lines drawn by the Europeans, are an example of this. Planet Earth has pretty much a spherical shape, rotating in outer space and can be viewed from any angle. However, when representing this on the map, that this is the international standard, Europe is at the top and the center of the image. Even expressions that we use every day reveal this Eurocentric way of seeing things. America, named after an Italian, the navigator Amerigo Vespucci, is often called the New World. This simple expression is already Eurocentric, placing Europe as the original world, the Old World, while American appeared later, disregarding the obvious fact that the whole world was formed simultaneously. Even when we say that the Europeans discovered the Americans is another Eurocentric way of seeing things. The largest religion in the world now is Christianity, and it has more than 2 billion followers worldwide. Much of this is due to the actions of Europeans who spread the Christian world, and not to mention the disdain of Eurocentric thinking towards significant achievements of African people. While works of European engineers are revered as products of human intelligence, such as Roman Colosseum, it is not uncommon to hear absurd theories about wonders like the Egyptian pyramids, whose construction is often attributed to extraterrestrials, as if the African people did not have the power and the intelligence to build such a thing. And even more extreme situations of persecution of foreigners or anyone considered inferior, where the roots of ultra-nationalist movements led to the rise of Nazism and fascism of the continent in the 20th century. The entire history of European exploration of the heritage and people of other continents is directly responsible for the development of the continent today. Europe will not be the political, economic, cultural, and sporting powerhouse it is today if it were not for the dominion exercised over other peoples in recent centuries. Of course, not all Europeans act the same way. We cannot put everyone in the same pot. But the fact is that it's very difficult to determine the real value of Europe and how we will continue to grow in the future in a scenario with less room to appropriate wealth from other countries. And this is how Europe stole the world, and see you in the next video.